The people who change your life rarely arrive in a limousine. Sometimes, they arrive on four muddy paws. The security camera mounted above the wrought iron gates recorded nothing unusual at first. Only thick snow drifting beneath the glow of old lanterns as another Colorado winter storm swallowed the winding road leading toward Blackwood Ridge. Visibility had dropped to almost nothing, and even the occasional SUV had disappeared hours earlier, leaving the neighborhood wrapped in silence. Then, just after 8:40 p.m., a lone figure emerged through the swirling white haze. A young woman struggled forward one careful step at a time, her worn winter boots sinking deep into nearly 8 inches of fresh snow. Beside her walked a large golden retriever, his thick golden coat dusted with white flakes while his leash was fashioned from nothing more than a spare scarf wrapped gently around his collar. Holding the woman's free hand was a little boy bundled inside an oversized blue coat that clearly wasn't new. His tiny boots dragged across the icy sidewalk as exhaustion slowed every step. The guard watching the security monitor leaned closer to the screen. Who would walk 2 miles through a snowstorm? Just to return a dog, he muttered under his breath. 2 hours earlier, Emily Carter had clocked out from the late shift at Miller's Family Diner on the edge of Aspen. At 28, she had mastered the habit of hiding exhaustion behind polite smiles, even after serving coffee for 10 straight hours. Tips had been slow all week, and after paying rent, utilities, and Noah's school lunch account, she had just enough cash left to buy a gallon of milk and a loaf of bread. Taking the city bus home wasn't an option tonight. She quietly folded the last $5 bill into her coat pocket that morning for Noah's asthma prescription waiting at the pharmacy tomorrow. Walking home in the storm seemed like the only sensible choice. Noah never complained. He simply slipped his small mitten into hers as they started the familiar 2-mile walk toward their apartment. They had almost reached Pine Creek Trail when a frantic bark echoed somewhere beyond the blowing snow. Emily stopped immediately. Another bark followed, louder this time, filled with panic instead of excitement. Through the white curtain appeared a golden retriever pacing nervously near the frozen creek, his expensive leather collar reflecting the streetlight whenever the wind shifted. Noah's eyes widened. "Mom, is he lost?" Emily slowly knelt despite the freezing ground soaking through her jeans. The dog approached cautiously before pressing his cold nose against her gloved hand, as if relieved someone had finally stopped. She brushed away the snow covering the metal tag hanging from his collar. One side displayed a single name, Max. The other revealed an address engraved beneath it, Blackwood Ridge, nearly 2 miles away. Noah wrapped both arms around himself as another icy gust swept across the trail. "Can we take him home until tomorrow?" he asked hopefully. Emily looked into the dog's gentle brown eyes, then back toward the road disappearing beneath the storm. Somewhere, someone was probably searching every street, terrified they had lost someone they loved. She smiled softly at her son, squeezing his mittened hand. "No, sweetheart," she whispered. "Someone out there is praying he'll come home tonight. Let's make sure that prayer gets answered." Emily loosened the scarf just enough for Max to walk comfortably beside them, and the dog stayed so close that his shoulder brushed against her leg with every careful step. It was almost as if he understood they were helping him find his way home. Snow continued falling in thick, silent waves, covering their footprints almost as quickly as they made them. Noah's breathing became heavier beneath his little wool scarf, and every few minutes Emily glanced down to make sure he was still warm enough. She rubbed his mitten with her thumb whenever she felt his fingers growing cold. "Are we almost there?" Noah asked quietly. Emily looked toward the address engraved on Max's tag once more before checking the street sign barely visible through the storm. "About another mile," she answered with a reassuring smile she did not completely feel. Her own toes had long since gone numb inside boots whose soles had begun separating weeks ago. Melted snow seeped through her socks with every step, but she kept walking without mentioning it. Max occasionally pulled gently toward intersections, as though recognizing familiar streets, then paused to look back and make sure Emily and Noah were still following. The little boy smiled despite his tired eyes. "He is waiting for us." Emily nodded softly. Good dogs never forget the people who are kind to them. They passed rows of dark houses glowing with warm lights behind frosted windows. Families gathered around dinner tables while fireplaces flickered inside comfortable living rooms. The smell of burning wood drifted through the cold air making Noah's stomach rumble. Emily pretended not to notice because hers did too. Dinner tonight would probably be peanut butter sandwiches once they finally made it home. If they made it home before midnight. Halfway up the next hill, Max suddenly stopped beside a silver mailbox and wagged his tail excitedly before looking farther up the road. Emily followed his gaze. Beyond the swirling snow stood enormous pine trees lining a private drive that curved toward a large estate hidden almost entirely behind iron fencing. Noah looked at the long driveway and sighed. That is a really big house. Emily smiled gently. Houses are just buildings, sweetheart. Home is wherever people are waiting for you. Noah thought about that for a moment before asking, "Do you think somebody is waiting for Max?" Emily looked at the faithful dog whose ears perked up with every passing second. "I think somebody is worried sick." The climb became steeper, and Noah stumbled slightly on an icy patch before catching himself. Emily immediately knelt, brushing snow from his little coat. "You are doing great," she whispered. "I know you are tired." Noah managed a brave smile. "I do not want Max to be scared anymore." Her heart tightened. Children often revealed life's biggest truths without realizing it. They reached the tall front gate, where security lights illuminated the falling snow like thousands of tiny stars. Before Emily could search for a doorbell, Max barked joyfully and bounded toward the entrance, his tail moving so fast that his whole body seemed to shake with excitement. Moments later, the gate began sliding open with a quiet mechanical hum. A uniformed security guard stepped forward, staring first at Max, then at Emily's soaked coat, then at Noah, whose cheeks had turned bright pink from the freezing air. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "You walked him here?" he asked slowly. Emily gave a small, tired nod. "We found him near Pine Creek Trail. His tag had this address." The guard looked back toward the mansion before speaking into the radio clipped to his shoulder. His voice sounded unusually urgent. "Sir, I think you need to come outside. Max is home, and there is something you should see." The radio had barely gone silent before the front door of the mansion swung open, releasing a wave of warm golden light that spilled across the snow-covered driveway. Max let out an excited bark and sprinted forward with joyful energy, his paws kicking up fresh powder as he raced toward a tall man descending the stone steps without bothering to zip his heavy winter coat. The moment the dog reached him, he dropped to one knee, wrapped both arms around the golden retriever, and buried his face against the thick golden fur. Relief washed across his expression with a sincerity that could never have been rehearsed. For several quiet seconds, he forgot the snow, the cold, and everyone watching. Emily lowered her eyes, recognizing something she understood all too well. Love always looked the same when someone feared losing it. Noah smiled beside her. He really missed Max. Emily squeezed his shoulder gently. "Yes, sweetheart. You can always tell." The man slowly stood, brushing snow from his coat before walking toward them. He appeared to be around 39, with dark brown hair lightly dusted with snowflakes and calm blue eyes that immediately settled on Noah before meeting Emily's exhausted gaze. His expensive wool coat and polished leather boots suggested success, yet there was nothing arrogant about the way he approached them. Instead, he looked genuinely concerned. "I am Daniel Harrison," he said softly, "and I do not think thank you is a big enough phrase for what you did tonight." Emily offered a tired smile. "We only brought him home." Daniel looked down at Max, who refused to leave Emily's side even after being reunited with his owner. The sight made him smile for the first time that evening. Most people would have called the number on his tag. Emily shrugged lightly. "My phone battery died hours ago." Then they would have waited until morning. She glanced toward the dark road behind her. Somebody was probably worried tonight. Daniel followed her eyes for a brief moment before looking at Noah, whose nose had turned bright red from the freezing wind. The little boy tried to hide a small cough behind his mitten. Daniel noticed immediately. "How long have you two been outside?" Emily hesitated. "Long enough." The security guard quietly stepped closer. "Sir, according to the address on the tag, they walked almost 2 miles from Pine Creek Trail." Daniel looked at Emily again, this time noticing details he had overlooked in the darkness. Snow had soaked through the knees of her jeans. The stitching along one boot had completely separated, exposing a damp wool sock. Her gloves had been repaired with careful hand sewing, and despite the bitter cold, she had wrapped the spare scarf around Max instead of herself. None of those things matched the quiet dignity with which she carried herself. She did not appear embarrassed. She simply looked tired. Noah suddenly shivered hard enough for Emily to kneel and adjust his scarf without thinking about her own comfort. Daniel watched the gesture in silence. It reminded him of his own mother years earlier, making impossible choices while pretending everything was fine. He cleared his throat gently. Please come inside for a few minutes. At least warm up before heading home. Emily shook her head almost immediately. That is kind of you, but we should go. Daniel seemed surprised. You walked through a snowstorm to help me, and you are refusing a warm fireplace? She smiled politely. We did not come here expecting anything in return. Before Daniel could answer, another cold gust swept through the open gate. Noah coughed again, this time unable to hide it. Daniel looked from the frightened little boy to the long road disappearing into the darkness. His expression quietly changed. He was no longer speaking as the owner of a large estate. He was speaking as someone who could not ignore what was standing in front of him. Then let me offer something different, he said gently. Please allow me to drive both of you home. Nothing more. Just a safe ride out of the storm. Emily instinctively tightened her grip on Noah's hand before answering. Thank you, Mr. Harrison, but we do not want to inconvenience you. Daniel gave a small smile that carried more warmth than persuasion. You already spent hours helping me. I think I can spend 15 minutes helping you. Emily hesitated. Accepting kindness had always been harder than offering it. Life had taught her that favors often arrived with invisible conditions attached, and she had spent years protecting herself and Noah from disappointments that began with generous promises. She looked down at her son. Noah tried to hide another cough, but the cold air caught in his chest anyway. Daniel noticed Emily's uncertainty and quietly stepped back instead of moving closer. There are no expectations, he said calmly. You brought Max home. I simply do not want a little boy walking 2 miles back through this weather. Emily searched his face for several silent seconds. Wealth often carried confidence that demanded obedience. This man carried something different. Patience. He was willing to accept no for an answer, yet he genuinely hoped she would reconsider. Noah gently tugged on her sleeve. Mom, I am kind of sleepy. That was enough. Emily finally nodded. All right, just a ride home. Daniel smiled. That sounds fair. He opened the rear passenger door of a dark SUV parked beneath the covered entrance, while one of the security guards hurried over with thick fleece blankets from inside the house. Emily immediately wrapped both blankets around Noah before accepting one herself. Daniel noticed she had once again placed someone else's comfort ahead of her own. He quietly turned the heater to its highest setting before taking the driver's seat. Max settled comfortably in the cargo area behind them, occasionally lifting his head to glance toward Emily as though still making sure she was nearby. The vehicle pulled away from the mansion and entered the snow-covered road. For several minutes, nobody spoke. The windshield wipers moved steadily across the glass, while soft instrumental music played almost unnoticed through the speakers. Noah slowly relaxed beneath the warm blanket, his breathing becoming calmer as color returned to his cheeks. Daniel glanced at him through the rearview mirror. How old are you, Noah? 5. Noah answered proudly while holding up his mittened hand with all 5 fingers stretched wide. I am in kindergarten. Do you like school? Noah smiled. I like reading. And drawing dogs. Daniel laughed softly. Then Max would probably approve. Noah looked toward the back of the vehicle where Max wagged his tail in response, making all 3 of them smile at once. The quiet became comfortable instead of awkward. Daniel looked back at the snowy road. You seem to know a lot about dogs. Noah answered before Emily could speak. Mom says animals get scared just like people. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Your mother sounds very wise. Emily smiled faintly while looking out the window at neighborhoods slowly passing by. Sometimes kindness is easier when nobody can say thank you. Daniel considered those words longer than she realized. He had spent years sitting through board meetings where every decision was measured by numbers, contracts, and returns on investment. Yet the woman sitting behind him had walked through a snowstorm expecting absolutely nothing in return for her effort. That kind of thinking had become surprisingly rare. What do you do? Daniel asked gently. Emily hesitated before answering. I wait tables at Miller's Family Diner. Mostly evening shifts. Long hours. Bills do not usually care about business hours. Daniel smiled quietly at the honesty. That is true. Another brief silence settled inside the warm vehicle. Snow continued falling beyond the windows while streetlights reflected softly across the white roads. The distance between two completely different worlds somehow felt smaller than it had only 30 minutes earlier. Daniel had still not mentioned the company he owned, and Emily had not asked why someone lived in a mansion large enough to disappear behind pine trees. For those few peaceful miles, neither wealth nor hardship seemed to matter as much as simple conversation. Then Daniel noticed the address glowing on the navigation screen as they approached the older apartment complex on the edge of town, and without saying a word, he quietly realized just how different Emily's everyday life truly was from his own. The apartment complex came into view behind a row of aging maple trees whose bare branches rattled in the winter wind. Daniel slowed the vehicle as the navigation announced the final turn. The brick buildings had once been painted a cheerful shade of red, but years of harsh winters had faded them into uneven patches of gray and brown. Several porch lights had burned out, leaving long stretches of the parking lot wrapped in darkness. Emily looked almost embarrassed as she pointed toward the last building near the back fence. Building C, the second floor. Daniel parked beside an older sedan covered with enough snow to suggest it had not moved in days. He stepped out first and hurried around to open Noah's door before the little boy could climb into the cold on his own. "Thank you," Emily said quietly as she gathered the blankets. "Please keep them," Daniel replied. "We have plenty." Emily immediately shook her head. "They belong to you." Daniel smiled gently. "Tonight they belong to whoever needs them more." She hesitated, then accepted with a grateful nod that spoke louder than words. Noah reached for Daniel's hand without hesitation as they crossed the icy parking lot together. Children had a remarkable ability to judge character before adults complicated everything with suspicion. Halfway to the entrance, Noah looked up. "Will Max remember us?" Daniel glanced toward the SUV where the golden retriever watched through the rear window. "I think Max remembers every person who has ever been kind to him." Noah smiled proudly. "Good. I will remember him too." Emily unlocked the apartment door, and a faint rush of cool air greeted them from inside. The heater was running, but only barely. The small living room was spotless despite its age. A second-hand couch sat neatly against one wall with a carefully folded quilt across the back. A tiny bookshelf held children's storybooks arranged with surprising care, and beside the window stood a small artificial Christmas tree decorated with handmade paper ornaments instead of expensive lights. Daniel noticed that every object seemed chosen with purpose rather than abundance. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was excessive. Noah hurried to a little table where crayons and unfinished drawings were spread across construction paper. Several pictures showed dogs, snowflakes, and smiling stick figures holding hands beneath bright yellow suns. Daniel smiled to himself. Hope apparently lived here even when money did not. Emily apologized softly. "It is not much." Daniel looked around again before answering. "It feels like home." Those simple words caught her by surprise. Most visitors who entered apartments like hers noticed what was missing. Daniel had noticed what remained. While Emily helped Noah remove his wet boots, Daniel's eyes wandered toward the kitchen counter. A stack of unopened utility bills rested beneath a magnet shaped like a snowman. Nearby sat a nearly empty loaf of bread, half a jar of peanut butter, and a gallon of milk. Nothing else occupied the shelves that he could see from where he stood. Beside the refrigerator hung Noah's weekly school schedule with several dates circled in blue marker. One note read, "Science fair supplies due Friday." Another simply said, "Pick up inhaler." Emily quickly stepped in front of the papers as though realizing what he had seen. She offered an apologetic smile that carried quiet dignity instead of shame. "There is always something waiting to be paid." Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward Noah, who was carefully placing one of the borrowed blankets over the old couch as though protecting it from the cold. The little boy had learned to care for things because replacing them was never guaranteed. Daniel suddenly understood that the greatest poverty inside this apartment was not the lack of possessions. It was the constant arithmetic of choosing which necessity had to wait until next week. He thanked Emily once more for bringing Max home, accepted the blankets she insisted on returning despite his objections, and quietly wished them both a peaceful night. As he drove away through the falling snow, the image that stayed with him was not the worn furniture or the unpaid bills. It was a little boy who still smiled after walking 2 miles through a blizzard simply because his mother believed that doing the right thing mattered more than taking the easy way home. Morning arrived wrapped in pale winter sunlight that reflected across the fresh blanket of snow outside Emily's apartment window. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a quiet stillness that made everything appear clean, even when life itself remained complicated. Emily woke before dawn, as she always did, preparing oatmeal for Noah before checking the small envelope where she kept every dollar carefully separated by purpose. Rent, electricity, groceries, medicine. There was almost nothing left after she counted it twice. She quietly folded the envelope shut before Noah could notice the worry in her eyes. "Today is going to be a good day," she said with the same gentle confidence she offered every morning. Noah smiled while finishing breakfast. "Because good things happen after snow?" Emily laughed softly. "Sometimes, but mostly because we get another chance to do our best." After dropping Noah at school, Emily stopped at the public library to print a fresh copy of her resume. She had earned an associate degree in accounting years earlier before life had changed direction, and although serving tables paid the bills, she still applied for office positions whenever she found an opening. Last week, she had submitted an online application for an accounts assistant position at Harrison Financial Group after seeing the listing on a community employment website. She had almost forgotten about it until her phone buzzed while she stood outside the library. The email subject line simply read, "Interview invitation." Emily blinked in surprise before opening the message. The interview had been scheduled for 11 o'clock that morning. She looked at the time. 9:15. Her heart began racing. She hurried home, changed into the only business outfit she owned, carefully pressed months earlier for another interview that had never led anywhere, then caught the city bus downtown. Harrison Financial Group occupied the top floors of one of the tallest glass buildings in Aspen. The polished marble lobby reflected sunlight across polished floors while employees carrying laptops moved confidently through security gates. Emily suddenly became very aware of the worn edges of her handbag and the inexpensive shoes she had polished the night before. She reminded herself that resumes mattered more than appearances. At least she hoped they did. The receptionist greeted her with a warm smile and handed her a visitor badge before directing her to the executive conference floor. Emily thanked her quietly and stepped into the elevator, watching the numbers climb higher than she had ever gone inside any office building. The doors opened onto a reception area surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the snow-covered mountains. Everything felt calm, organized, and impossibly elegant. An assistant approached with a clipboard. "Ms. Carter, they are ready for you." Emily followed her through a hallway lined with photographs celebrating community projects, scholarships, and charitable events sponsored by the company. She found herself wondering what kind of executive invested so much attention in local families instead of only business awards. The assistant stopped before a large conference room and opened the door with a welcoming smile. "Please, go right in." Emily stepped inside, smoothing the sleeve of her blazer before lifting her eyes toward the far end of the table. Her footsteps stopped instantly. Standing beside the window, reviewing a folder with her resume clipped neatly inside, was Daniel Harrison. He looked up at the exact same moment. Surprise flashed across his face before giving way to the same calm smile she remembered from the snowy driveway the night before. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Emily glanced from him to the company logo displayed across the conference room wall, then back again as understanding slowly settled over her. The man who had quietly driven her home through the snow was not simply the owner of a beautiful house. He was the founder and chief executive officer of the very company where she had come hoping for a chance to rebuild her future. Emily forced herself to breathe before extending her hand. "Congratulations," she said with a small, composed smile. "I guess I should have realized last night that you own more than a very beautiful dog." Daniel accepted the handshake, his expression warm but professional. "And I should probably apologize for not introducing myself properly." Emily shook her head. "You did introduce yourself. You just did not mention the company." Daniel smiled. "That is usually not the first thing I tell people." He gestured toward the chair across the conference table. "Please, have a seat." The interview began like any other. Daniel asked about her accounting courses, the bookkeeping software she had used, and the years she had spent balancing restaurant cash drawers after closing each night. Emily answered honestly, never exaggerating what she knew and never pretending to have experience she did not possess. Whenever she did not know an answer, she simply admitted it and explained how she would learn. Daniel noticed something rare. She never tried to impress him. She simply tried to tell the truth. When the interview ended, Emily gathered her folder and stood. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Harrison." Daniel remained thoughtful for a moment before speaking. "There is one more thing." Emily paused. "I would like to invite you to participate in a 3-day evaluation before we make a hiring decision." Emily looked surprised. "A skills assessment?" "Partly," Daniel replied. "You would spend time with different departments, complete practical assignments, and work alongside our accounting team. It allows us to see how candidates approach real situations rather than only interviews." Emily nodded without hesitation. "That sounds fair." She left the building believing she had simply entered the final stage of the hiring process. What she did not know was that Daniel had quietly asked every department manager to treat her exactly like any other applicant. No special treatment. No mention of the previous evening. He wanted to discover whether the kindness she had shown during the snowstorm had been a single extraordinary moment or simply the way she lived every ordinary day. The evaluation began the following morning. Emily arrived 15 minutes early carrying a notebook and a lunch pack from home. During her first assignment, a junior employee accidentally entered several expense reports into the wrong accounts, creating hours of additional work. Nobody had noticed the mistake yet. Emily could have ignored it and focused only on her own evaluation, but instead she quietly stayed after the exercise ended, helping correct every record before leaving for lunch. She never mentioned her extra effort to anyone. Later that afternoon, while organizing archived invoices, she discovered an envelope containing several $100s in cash that had accidentally been left inside an old project file. The easiest choice would have been to place it back inside the cabinet and continue working. Instead, she immediately carried it to the finance supervisor. "I think someone is probably looking for this," she said simply. The supervisor thanked her, but Emily thought nothing more about it. Unknown to her, Daniel had already been informed. On the second day, another small test appeared without warning. The cafeteria cashier accidentally charged Emily only $2 for a lunch worth almost 12. Several employees behind her smiled knowingly, expecting her to enjoy the unexpected bargain and keep walking. Emily took 2 steps before stopping. She looked at the receipt, turned around, and returned to the register. "I believe there was a mistake," she said gently. "You forgot to charge me for most of my meal." The embarrassed cashier corrected the total while thanking her repeatedly. Emily simply smiled and carried her tray to an empty table. Watching from the second-floor balcony above, Daniel folded his arms thoughtfully. None of these moments involved snowstorms, lost dogs, or dramatic choices. They involved ordinary opportunities where nobody seemed to be watching. Yet every single time, Emily chose the harder path because, to her, it was also the right one. For the first time in years, Daniel realized he was no longer evaluating a candidate's resume. He was quietly witnessing the character of a person whose integrity remained exactly the same whether the world noticed or not. The afternoon sun reflected across the glass walls of Harrison Financial Group as Emily completed the final exercise of her 3-day evaluation. She organized the last financial statements, double-checked every figure, and placed the completed folder neatly on the conference table before quietly thanking the accounting supervisor for the opportunity to learn from the team. She expected to shake a few hands, ride the bus home, and wait several anxious days for an email like every other applicant. Instead, the supervisor smiled warmly. "Mr. Harrison would like to see you before you leave." Emily felt her heartbeat quicken as she followed the familiar hallway toward Daniel's office. The room overlooked the snow-covered mountains, now glowing beneath the late afternoon light. Daniel stood beside the window with 2 mugs of coffee resting on a small table nearby. He motioned toward the chair across from him. "Please sit down." Emily smiled politely, but remained nervous. "I hope I did not make too many mistakes." Daniel sat across from her and folded his hands calmly. "You made several." Emily blinked, then laughed softly at his unexpected honesty. "That sounds about right." Daniel smiled. "One spreadsheet formula was inefficient. You overlooked one formatting instruction, and you spent too much time helping other employees when you could have finished your own assignments earlier." Emily lowered her eyes. I am sorry. Do not be. She looked back up, surprised by the gentleness in his voice. Daniel leaned back slightly before continuing. Do you know why I created this evaluation? Emily assumed the obvious answer. To find the best accountant. Daniel slowly shook his head. Technical skills can be taught. Character usually cannot. Silence settled between them. Outside the window, snowflakes drifted lazily through the afternoon sunlight. Daniel reached into a folder resting on his desk and placed several printed reports in front of her. They were summaries from department managers describing the previous 3 days. One praised her patience while training another employee who had fallen behind. Another described the envelope of cash she had immediately returned. A third mentioned the cafeteria receipt she insisted on correcting even though nobody would have questioned the mistake. Emily looked up in confusion. You knew about all of that? Daniel nodded. I asked them to tell me everything. Not because I expected perfection, because I wanted to understand the person behind the resume. Emily smiled awkwardly. I was only doing what anyone should do. Daniel held her gaze. That is exactly the point. He stood and slowly walked toward the window before speaking again. Most applicants spent these 3 days trying to impress me. You spent them trying to help people who could not improve your chances of getting hired. He paused before turning back toward her. The night you brought Max home, I told myself that perhaps the storm had simply revealed the best version of you. His smile grew softer. Now I know it did not. The storm simply introduced me to the person you already were. Emily felt her eyes grow warm. She had spent years wondering whether kindness still mattered in a world that often rewarded shortcuts. Daniel continued quietly. You walked 2 miles through a snowstorm for someone who could not possibly repay you. Then you came into this company and made the same choices when you believed nobody important was watching. That told me everything I needed to know. He stepped closer and extended a sealed envelope across the table. Emily Carter, I would like to offer you the position of staff accountant at Harrison Financial Group. She accepted the envelope with trembling hands, but did not open it immediately. May I ask you something? Daniel nodded. Why me? His answer came without hesitation. Because numbers protect a company's future. Character protects everything else. If you will walk through a blizzard to return a frightened dog simply because it was the right thing to do, I know you will never betray the trust of the people who depend on you. That is the kind of person I want building this company with me. Emily left Daniel's office holding the offer letter against her chest as though it might disappear if she loosened her grip. For a long moment, she simply stood beside the elevator overlooking the snow-covered streets below, allowing herself to breathe. She had imagined this moment countless times during sleepless nights after Noah had fallen asleep, but reality somehow felt quieter than the dreams. There were no dramatic celebrations. No applause. Just a grateful heart finally resting after carrying too much for too long. The first person she called was Noah's school. His teacher smiled as she handed him the classroom phone. Mom, he answered excitedly. Emily laughed through happy tears. Guess what, sweetheart? Mom got the new job. There was a brief silence before Noah shouted loudly enough that she could hear children laughing in the background. I knew it. I told everybody good things happen after snow. Emily wiped away a tear before whispering, You were right. The following weeks brought changes that arrived one small step at a time. Emily no longer worried whether she could afford Noah's inhaler before payday. The overdue utility notices slowly disappeared from the refrigerator door. The little apartment did not become luxurious, but it became peaceful. The heater stayed on without constant worry. Fresh groceries filled the kitchen shelves, and Noah proudly carried brand new science fair supplies into school with a smile that seemed brighter than winter sunshine. Yet the biggest change was not measured in dollars. It was measured in hope. Emily remained exactly the same person inside the office that she had been outside in the snow. She arrived early, treated every co-worker with respect, admitted mistakes without excuses, and quietly volunteered to help whenever someone fell behind. Her kindness never became a performance because it had never been one to begin with. Daniel noticed that every prediction he had made about her character proved true. Several months later, Harrison Financial Group hosted its annual community winter festival at a neighborhood park. Families filled the walking trails while children built snowmen beneath strings of warm lights. Noah raced across the open field with laughter echoing through the crisp afternoon air. Suddenly, a familiar golden retriever bounded toward him, his tail wagging with joyful excitement. Max. Noah laughed as the dog happily circled him through the fresh snow. Daniel followed a few steps behind, carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. He handed one to Emily with a grateful smile. I had a feeling he would remember his favorite walking partner. Emily watched Max gently nudge Noah's mitten with his nose before answering softly. I think he remembers everyone who showed him kindness. Daniel looked across the snowy field where children and parents laughed together beneath a pale winter sky. I believe you are right. They stood in comfortable silence while Noah threw a snowball into the air for Max to chase. The same season that had once tested Emily's strength had quietly become the season that restored her future. Daniel finally broke the silence with a thoughtful smile. Do you know what I have learned since that night? Emily looked at him curiously. He glanced toward the winding trail where their lives had unknowingly begun to change. People often believe success comes from making the smartest decisions. Sometimes it begins with making the kindest one. Emily watched Noah hug Max before the dog happily ran back through the snow. She smiled gently, remembering the freezing walk that had seemed so ordinary at the time. She had never expected it to change anything. She had simply believed that someone, somewhere, was waiting for a beloved friend to come home. And perhaps that was life's quietest miracle. The greatest blessings rarely arrive because we chase them. They arrive because we choose to do the right thing even when nobody promises us anything in return.